Hi, my name is Jeff Fortgang, and I'm a psychologist with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers of Massachusetts.
And I'm Shawn Healy. I'm also a psychologist with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers of Massachusetts.
We have a lot in common, don't we? And
We do.
Another thing we have in common is that we wrote this book that you can get through the ABA press. And we have decided to present a few videos jumping off of that and talking about depression in lawyers. And today we wanted to talk about how can you help another lawyer that may be depressed or in whom you notice changes in their demeanor, their behavior, their apparent mood. And Shawn will be the primary source on this. What kinds of situations, Shawn, have we become acquainted with that led us to realize that this is an important topic to discuss?
Yeah, I think most commonly we get calls through our helpline from either employers or colleagues who are noticing something about a coworker or a friend, colleague, and they don't know what to do. So they are seeing a change in behavior. They're seeing a person who was once reliable all of a sudden not be reliable, or someone who's missing or isolating, or some significant change in their behavior or their mood. And quite commonly, it's hard to know what to do. And so, particularly if you're not a trained mental health professional like we are, it's hard to know how to approach, what to do, what resources are available. And so we get calls periodically from people who are just concerned and wanting some advice on how to approach, how to be helpful, and also how to do that in a way that doesn't cause harm. So I think that's one of the fears that people have, is because I don't know what to do or what to say, I don't want to make things worse. So I don't want to embarrass this person. I don't want to say something that's going to make the situation worse than it is. Or I don't want to assume that there's something going on when maybe there's not something going on, or this person isn't struggling the way that I thought. And so when I get those calls, usually I talk through the situation, because every situation is different. Every relationship is different. So sort of the best course of action often depends on the relationship that person has with the person they're concerned about, the setting, lots of dynamics. So it's important to sort of have an individual approach to those situations.
I've noticed that people often have misgivings about whether they're getting involved or whether they shouldn't. Often they talk to some other colleagues about the person that they're concerned about, and then they're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking behind his or her back. So you try to get a sense of the individual situation. And so how do you help them determine whether there is a real problem?
I think one of the things that I ask people to consider is just based on how well they know this person, like what is it objectively that they're observing, like those changes or indicators that suggest to them that something is different, something is wrong, or this person is struggling in some way, and sort of to separate that from their subjective interpretation of it. So because we are curious beings, we like to explain things that we don't have answers to. And so oftentimes we'll interpret a situation in a way that makes sense to us, but that can sometimes be accurate and sometimes not. So I encourage people just to stick with the objective things that they're observing. And then based on the relationship that they have with this person, to sort of brainstorm appropriate ways to let that person know that they care in some way.
I find when these calls come in, sometimes people feel like they're supposed to figure out what the problem is. Like,
Hmm.
oh, I don't think it's addiction, but maybe it could be because he seemed sleepy last week, or, but I'm not sure what it is. And I think we can reassure them that they don't have to become diagnosticians.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great point. Not only do they not have to figure out what the actual issue is, they don't have to figure out what the best course of action is afterwards. So that's another barrier that keeps people from intervening or saying something is, I don't know what to recommend. Like I'm not a mental health clinician, I'm not a treater. So I don't know what this person's going to need, and that's okay. Like you don't need to know that. I think one of the most important elements of helping a colleague or a friend is letting that person know that they're not alone, that you see them, that you care about them, and that you're willing to be there, whether that is a direct resource to help them figure out what they need, or just be present and let them know that they're not alone. Because when someone is suffering, one of the things that makes that suffering much worse is to feel like I'm alone in this suffering. No one understands, no one cares. And it's really powerful when that person feels like, at least I'm not alone in what I'm dealing with. And most people who are suffering in some way, they don't expect the people around them in their lives to have all the answers for them. That's not something that most people expect. And so just having that connection with somebody else who is showing some compassion can be really powerful.
And perhaps especially in this profession, where historically people have felt a really strong need to put up a front as always being in control and always having things well in hand, and to hear from another person that I can see that you're having difficulty and I'm not judging you for it, that I'm
Yeah,
actually interested in you as a human.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to sort of be aware of that hesitation or that concern around reputation and putting your best face forward. One, because that's a barrier for people to admit, that they need help or that they would benefit from help. And also it can explain, if you, one explanation for a response to your outreach might be like, no thanks, like I'm fine. And that might explain that response. If someone really is suffering and you make the effort to let them know that you care, you see them, that might be their responses. I'm fine, to maintain that facade of like everything's good, like there's nothing wrong. Um, and in those situations, again, it depends on each individual situation. Sometimes just letting that person know that you're there, not that you're trying to push them into sort of opening up, but just let them know that you're there. And like you said, you're not judging them for it. You're there as a compassionate person, as a human being who cares about another human being in a non-judgmental way. Um, so you might not be able to change their concern about asking for help, that vulnerability, but you at very least can sort of show them what it's like to show concern.
And you've planted a seed in a case like that. So
Absolutely.
if the initial response may be, I have to appear to be problem free, but then at a later point when things are really weighing them down, they may remember, Shawn approached me and he seemed interested, and I really need to tell somebody about this now, and they might come back to you at that time.
Yeah.
What you said also is important to realize that no matter how you approach people, there's a variety of ways that they may respond.
Mm-hmm.
They won't always thank you
Right.
for your interest,
Exactly.
especially, we're talking primarily about depression, but if addiction is part of the picture, it's not unusual that you might get an argumentative and accusatory response.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to realize even then that you may be planting a seed, and that this is not to be taken personally.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important to realize that you don't have to look for a certain response in order for your efforts to be helpful or to be successful. Like you said, it could be just planting a seed. And you don't have to know what to say, right? You don't have to have the answers in the right words. I think it's really helpful to get comfortable saying, I don't know how to help, or I don't know what to say right now. And that's okay. Right? That's being a human being, that's being vulnerable and transparent with somebody. So just because you don't know what to say doesn't mean that should prevent you from letting somebody know that you're concerned about them. Because sometimes just saying, I've noticed this, I'm just concerned about you. I don't know what to say or how to help in this moment, but I just want you to know that. And sometimes that in and of itself can be enough.
I think it's even better to come from a more or less humble position about that, rather than, I know I've got everything figured out, and I know what's wrong with you and what you should do. People will not necessarily respond well to that kind of approach. And we know in communication in general between people that if the communicator focuses on, this is my experience, rather than this is what you're doing, they'll get a more receptive ear.
Right. So if I was concerned about you and I approached you and said, this is what I've noticed. I know for myself, when I have been under pressure or when I have struggled, it's been helpful to talk to somebody else. I'm not telling you that you need to talk to somebody else. I'm just sharing with you what is helpful to me, or what has been helpful to me. And you're right. I think that is much more, that's non-threatening, right? It's not me prescribing what you should do, or me having to figure out what would be best for you. I can just share my experiences.
And to say something like, this is what I saw or how I felt when you were at that meeting yesterday, rather than, oh, you definitely have depression, you better do something about it. It's going to, the first way is going to generate much more receptiveness.
Right. The other thing that often comes up in these conversations that I have with people who are wondering what to do is, and I think this might be more common in the legal community, but not exclusively, is that someone's comfort with emotion, someone else expressing emotion, can be limited. For example, if I've talked to lawyers who are really concerned that if they give feedback to somebody and that person starts to cry or tear up, that's really uncomfortable for them, because they're like, I don't know what to do if someone starts to cry. And it's important to realize that if the response that you're getting from someone you're concerned about is, more emotion, whether that's crying or frustration or embarrassment, that you don't have to, one, you don't have to, and two, you're not responsible for fixing that person's feelings. So if someone starts to cry after you've expressed concern, that's okay. Like it's not an indicator that they're suffering more. Oftentimes it's an indicator that they feel comfortable letting it out and expressing their feelings. And those feelings aren't permanent. So whether it's crying, whether it's frustration or anger or embarrassment, those feelings won't last forever. And that's okay. And to your earlier point, those efforts often plant a seed that is more permanent. Just that message that I'm concerned and that there are things that might be helpful can stick with somebody much longer than the actual temporary expression of emotion.
And I'm not going to run away when you start to cry.
Mm-hmm.
And this also brings up the fact that in these interchanges, it's not only about telling, it's about listening. And so this can open up a door, especially if someone is starting to feel things, for them to disclose something that they may have been carrying around as a burden and may not have talked about before. Mm-hmm. And it's affirming for them to see that someone else, perhaps in their profession, are willing to listen to it. You're not freaked out by it. You're interested in it. And that's a reason also why you have to have some time when you do this.
Right.
You can't say, oh, my Uber is here, gotta go. You have to be able to make time for a meaningful interchange.
That's a good point. Yeah, because if you don't make that time and you have 30 seconds to let someone know that you care, but they actually want to talk, suddenly, you cutting off the conversation and moving on to the next thing might communicate the opposite of what you're intending, which is, I have something more important. And then sort of on that theme of things that are not helpful, sort of going back to that idea that you don't have to have the answers for what's going to be helpful. It's important not to try to fix the situation. So someone feeling depressed is a good example, where oftentimes people want their colleague or their friend to feel better. Okay, I don't want you to be depressed. I want you to feel happy, or at least better than you do now. So some people are tempted to sort of prescribe something quick, like, oh, just, laugh it off, or, just do something to fix the problem. And oftentimes that's counterproductive. At the very least, it's not as productive as listening, right? Being available, being non-judgmental, and showing compassion.
Right. One thing that sometimes comes up, and I don't even know if we would have the same response to this question, and it would vary depending on the circumstance, but is when people are saying, should I talk to this person one-to-one, or should a few of us who share this concern and observation approach him or her together? Has that come up for you, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that has come up. And usually how I respond with those questions is to ask the person about the situation specifically, about their relationship with the person. So in scenarios where I'm noticing something about someone else, but I don't know them well, I don't have a trusting relationship with them, or I don't know how it's going to come across. If I'm, a rival in some way, either opposing counsel or in the firm, if we have a competitive relationship, if I think this person is going to take it poorly, and I'm going to do, more harm than good, then it might make sense to involve somebody else who that person feels more comfortable with. Or at the very least, involving someone else who shares that concern, it can sort of validate the concern that I have, as opposed to that person feeling like, I'm just making this up to sort of get one up on them. Also, if I just don't know the person very well, they might take it as like, who are you? Like, you don't know me. And so involving somebody else who also knows that person might make sense. And it also might depend on the severity of the situation. So if I'm concerned that this person isn't just feeling stressed and down, if I'm concerned that they might be suicidal, if they might be severely struggling with addiction, then I might see that as like outside of my wheelhouse in terms of my ability to be helpful, and therefore involving other people would make more sense.
Right, and a group approach is certainly a more powerful one. Among other things, the person is outnumbered. Right. And but there are times where that's what's needed. I would say also, certainly, as you said, if you're worried about their safety, if addiction is involved and there's dangerous behavior like a lot of drunk driving, also if their job is on the line, let's say in a law firm, then before firing somebody, hearing from several people together, this is what we see and this is what we want, and that now this is moving into the realm of so-called intervention. It can happen at all different levels of intensity. The other time that occurred to me as you were talking is when you've already tried something individually and the person has essentially been in denial and the problem seems to be getting worse, then the next step might be some kind of group approach.
Yeah, and then to the flip side of that is when is it appropriate to do that individually, or alone. And sort of like the flip side of those situations where you're not concerned that this person's safety is on the line. You do have a relationship, or at least a level of comfort with the person, that talking to them one-on-one about a personal matter wouldn't seem like out of left field. You have some sort of professional relationship with them, that you have some trust, things like that.
So having had this conversation with someone, if they were to say, so what do you think I should do? What do you advise someone who might call us with concern about a colleague as to how they would answer that question?
Yeah, I think it would depend on the situation, obviously, what that person thinks they need or would be helpful to them. So me as the concerned person, if you asked me, well, thanks for talking to me, I think I do need to, or I would benefit from some help. What do you suggest? And I don't know. It's important to remember that, particularly in Massachusetts, we have Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers as a free resource. So you can access us prior to those conversations, during those conversations, after those conversations. And so you can either direct that person to us, or you yourself can contact us to find out resources, just to get connected with us, and we can help identify resources. And you can also talk about like what's been helpful to you. If you personally have benefited from therapy or medication or a group, or you've been to a presentation that we've done on taking care of yourself, you can reference those things as well.
Right. I think using yourself as an example can be very useful. And the only pitfall with that is to not get into too much detail about yourself and have the conversation start to be about you instead of that. But yes, I mean, I think a first level answer to the question, what now, would be how about your lawyer assistance program as a place to get an assessment and some idea of what's going on and what the resources are for that. In any case, we all hope that lawyers will continue what I perceive to be a warming up to the idea of getting help and to not needing to pretend to be perfect. And we'll be back with another of these to talk about other aspects of depression, its nature, and its treatment. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks.